Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Where are you on the health disease continuum? The answer may surprise you. Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the Exxon Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. With us this hour to explore the health disease continuum is Dr. Thomas J. Lewis. Dr. Lewis is a leading authority on the mechanisms of chronic disease. He holds a Ph.D. from MIT and credentials from the Harvard School of Public Health. His main focus as leader of Health Revival Partners is translating the best of breed medical knowledge from mentors and thought leaders into logical disease prevention and reversal medical protocols. Dr. Lewis is the author of numerous books, including Cancer is an Infectious Disease. His website, healthrevivalpartners.com. Dr. Lewis, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Gwilda, my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
I think this is such an important topic right now because it seems to me, I could be wrong, please correct me, but it seems like chronic diseases are on the rise.
Well, the statistics are there. Like in early 1900s, 16% of adults had a chronic condition. Now 60% and 40% have two or more. And we just can tell by the pharmaceutical usage that there's a huge uptick. And if pharmaceuticals were working, when we see a decline, not an increase. So obviously they're just symptomatic treatment at best. So it satisfies a human need for instantaneous gratification without solving critical problems, which is a sad case. The other piece is when we compare our longevity to, say, the Japanese, we live 9 years shorter, yet we spend a lot more and take a lot more drugs in our health, through our healthcare system. So we can see a lack of congruency between the two.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your training.
So how I really got into this business is as a scientist, I was always looking at disease mechanisms. I had this mentor, a fellow student at Worcester Polytechnic Institute, and I was studying organic chemistry. And he said, "Tom, stop memorizing reactions and learn mechanisms." And fast forward 20 years, 30 years later, I said, you know what? Medicine is a science. And why do we have 68,000 diagnostic codes? I mean, aren't we a whole? The diagnostic codes reflect the fact that things are looked at very much in isolation. So in my world, really 5 mechanisms, compared to 68,000, really tell the story of chronic disease, which is pretty much 90% of healthcare costs, misery, and the driver of early mortality, and even in the COVID era, the sudden death syndrome.
So, would you mind? I know all of us know what or are kind of familiar with chronic disease, but let's define it.
So yes, the simplest way to define it is, inflammation is considered a driver of essentially every disease. But inflammation is inappropriately blamed because inflammation, at the end of the day, is a measure of the peaking or the activity of our immune system. So we really need to titrate back down and find out what is driving the inflammatory process. So the problem we have is when we look at regular labs and we have an event, I have a little graphic of a lady sneezing, into a handkerchief. Do we catch Alzheimer's? Do we catch heart disease? Do we catch diabetes? Do we catch other metabolic and, rheumatoid arthritis, things like that? Certainly we don't. And so we're programmed to instantaneous gratification, and we want to see that result after something very wrong happens in our life. But there are clues for decades. Like, if you look at Harvard Medical School did this, you looked at kids, 20-year-old, 30-year-olds that died in auto accidents, and you analyze their brain, they actually have the beginnings of the amyloid, the hallmarks of Alzheimer's, in their 20s and 30s. And so this disease can matriculate over 40 or 50 years. So the point is, we have to be able to measure differently to see the genesis of this. And then everything in nature, that little complex term, but the Gaussian curve, the bell curve, or log linearity, things happen very slowly at first. And then if you don't take proper measures, then all of a sudden it can escalate and go up very rapidly. And so we look at chronic disease as an acute syndrome because that's how it manifests. But it really is, think about Smokey the Bear. Okay, we have a huge blazing forest fire and it's out of control. That's what the medical system is dealing with. But Smokey the Bear says, put out your campfire, because that little ember, and the wind comes along, can take that ember and start something that may start out as very small, and then morph into something tragic when you're talking about health consequences. So, really we have two diseases. We have smoldering, chronic, and we have flaming, acute, but they're highly interrelated. So why are our lab tests, our standard reference ranges, and things, the way we measure health, they're very gross. They don't pick up the smoldering. And so one of the initiatives that we did is looked at labs from a very different lens, from the smoldering lens. And so what we found is that in the literature, the medical literature, it's a completely different industry from healthcare delivery. There's tons of data that shows how a biomarker, let's just pick C-reactive protein, that's inflammation in the vessels mainly.
Okay.
How does C-reactive protein affect mortality? So there are studies that show what are called hazard ratios for dying young as C-reactive protein goes up, or if C-reactive protein is consistently slightly up over a long period of time. And that's how we developed a completely different set of reference ranges for lab biomarkers. So we say our labs are titrated to early all-cause mortality. And when you do that and you compare our ranges to standard reference ranges that every doctor uses, and I know so many people complain to me that, like, I feel like crap, but my doctor looks at my labs and they say, well, they all look pretty good. Must be in your head. Maybe we'll give you some SSRI to calm your anxiety or something like that. But what they don't realize is that we are on this continuum, okay? The continuum is not linear either. We feel good, apparently well, we're apparently healthy, then all of a sudden, whoops, symptom starts emerging. We see our doctor, the doctor dismisses it, and the next thing you know, something untoward happens in your life that nobody really wants.
So when we're dealing with the subliminal, if you will, below where our testing registers it as a problem, our current testing, if it continues, does then genetic predisposition play in there? In other words, you could go along and never have the disease, except you don't catch the smolder, and then it busts out into wherever the weak link is genetically.
I wrote profusely on this on my most recent book called Health Freedom Lost. And, the CDC states in their complete ignorance that you and I, Gwilda, are 99.9% the same genetically. And it's that 0.1% that determines all the differentiations in our diseases. But 60% of us have chronic diseases. It's really boils down to very boring things like lifestyle. And when we think something is genetic, it's often congenital. Congenital means passed from mom or picked up very early in life. These things are called cryptic. Like, if you bang your knee and you're bleeding, the association between the event and the problem is very obvious. But in chronic conditions, you can, we all have, Epstein-Barr. We get mono when we're in our 20s. We have herpes varicella that can show up later on in life, herpes zoster as shingles. So these things are latent and they're waiting opportunistically for something to go wrong in your life. And one of the major drivers today is stress. Stress puts you into fight or flight, which means you're allocating resources for that fear flight, and it's taking away resources from somewhere else. We don't have infinite bandwidth in immunity. That's why we do get sick, but we can recover. But so that's a driver. Poor nutrient density. People think diabetes is just an excess of calories. It's really not that. I mean, that plays a role. It's not, I'm not going to besmirch Tom Siegfried and Jason Fong and Robert Lustig, but when you have excess calories, it almost always comes with a deficiency in nutrients. And what I tell people is, we're not a piece of plastic, and a piece of plastic you put out in the sunlight, and a couple of years later it becomes powder. We have repair mechanisms. So disease is all about, or averting disease is all about keeping the repair ahead of the deterioration. And that's where micronutrients come in, because micronutrients are your carpenters. They're involved in enzymatic reactions, which was rebuilding tissue all the time. So it's not about the macronutrients, it's about the micronutrients. So I have a little story I tell. I try to create what's called an adrenaline imprint. So like when you think back in your life, you can remember tragic and triumphant things, but the banal things you don't know so much. So this is why I say, if you want to know that you are repairing, just look in the toilet and your poop is brown. Why is your poop brown? Because you're shedding red blood cells. A red blood cell only lasts 4 months, and it's recycled like the dollar bill, or created anew, taken out of circulation, you have new ones. So when your body's brilliant, it takes the red blood cell, pops the iron out.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to leave this as a cliffhanger and get back with it on the other side of a station break. Dr. Lewis and I will return very shortly, so don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Are you interested in evolving with the times and becoming all you can be? Don't you wish there was one place to find the latest information to help guide you through the process? I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, host of Mission Evolution Radio TV. Join me on my mission to find the latest evolutionary knowledge and tools. The guests on Mission Evolution are leading experts in a wide variety of divergent topics, including allopathic, holistic, and integrative medicine, epigenetics, enlightenment, quantum physics, meditative practices, environmental issues, spiritual evolution, trauma healing, and so much more. Mission Evolution Radio TV is aired worldwide through the X-Zone Broadcast Network, X-Zone TV Channel 32 on Simul TV. You can enjoy our archives of radio or TV shows with our compliments at www.missionevolution.org. Come see the amazing lineup of guests and topics. With more than 200 episodes to choose from, you're sure to find what you're looking for. Visit www.missionevolution.org. Is it possible to reverse chronic disease? With us this hour discussing the current healthcare system is Dr. Thomas J. Lewis. Dr. Lewis is the author of numerous books, including Cancer is an Infectious Disease. Dr. Lewis, we were in the toilet, as I recall, um, talking about our eliminations, recycle, what things look like as they relate to red blood cells. So would you continue that, please?
Sure. So whether you're 2 or 102, your poop is brown, right? And that reflects the fact that you're shedding red blood cells, and that means you're making new ones. So you are repairing and recovering every day for your entire lifespan. And you mentioned, can chronic diseases be reversed? That the answer to that is absolutely yes. But if you don't know what's causing the chronic condition at the very root cause, then the best you can do is mask symptoms. And so let me just give you a quick example. C-reactive protein inflammation. It's a great marker, okay? But how do you lower CRP? The biomarker tells you what, but it doesn't tell you why and how. That's why we've developed a very robust risk evaluation system with a scoring system that also gives you suggestions. But so someone might have a CRP up because they have root canals or bleeding gums that are spewing infection into their body. Someone else may have a dysbiosis in their gut, and certain foods really trigger sensitivity, and then they have leaky gut syndrome. So these cytokines from the reaction against that allergic response gets into the bloodstream, and we see elevated C-reactive protein.
So
Either of those
let,
two
let me
mechanisms, though, could manifest in, say, arthritis or things like that. So
so
can
let
we
me back
reverse?
up. Let,
Yeah,
let me back up just a little bit. So you're saying that there can be things that we don't even know are wrong in our body, like a tooth going bad, okay, that then impact the entire body inflammation wise?
absolutely. If you follow a red blood cell, it goes through your heart in less than a minute. It's complete circulation. And the brain is 10 times more metabolically active than average tissue. So it's being impacted by this as well. So I'll just give you an example. I see very frequently the congruence, the connection between root canals, especially those that have been in a long time, and diseases like glaucoma. Okay, because the root and the retina are within centimeters of each other, and when you chew, you bite down, you create tremendous pressure. It's a little pump. Dr. Lockensgard, a biological dentist, taught me that. So this is going into your CNS, your nervous system fluid, and into your bloodstream, and we can detect that. But it's a small signal because we're not talking about you're grossly infected with a cold or flu. It's just a little bit of infection manifesting in the root of the tooth, and a root canal is a dead tooth, so it doesn't have immunity, so that'll spew out. And I've
Interesting.
had many people that have different health issues, and they go to their dentist, and one lady just had a crown, not even a root canal, and the dentist said, you have a lot of infection in their crown, and there's clearly from the analytics, the technique they use to look at this, that it's impinging on your sinus, and she had constant postnasal drip. So just dealing with that infection, and in this case with a chlorine dioxide solution and some PRP and replacing the crown, actually mitigated both problems.
It sounds like can be pretty doggone hard to find.
You know,
You,
it, you've got to, when you ask questions, people tell you the truth. So like that lady said that she's had complaints about her oral cavity for a long period of time, just a little bit of recession, a little bit of bleeding gum. And then we see the white blood cell counts up. And then I have other techniques to get more granular. Then you send them to a good dentist that looks into these things. One of the easiest things to look at, which I think is the most prolific, is gut dysbiosis. And people say, oh, I have a little rumbly in the tumbly or gas, no big deal. I mean, when you have symptoms, you are well down the continuum, and we got to fix that. So, there's an expression, you are what you eat. It's not completely wrong, but it's mostly wrong. You are what you absorb. So the sad thing is, people have been in this pattern of the American diet, the sad diet, and their guts out of whack, and they've had this come to Jesus moment, and they've improved their diet tremendously, but they haven't seen big gains in their health. It's because just improving your diet doesn't necessarily improve the gut. And when your gut's not working well, not everything's absorbed the same. So carbs and sugars are easily absorbed, but the micronutrients that are the most important are hardest to extract out of food and absorb through the intestinal wall. So even if you're eating well, if you have any kind of gut dysbiosis, your physiology is seeing junk food.
so what is gut dysbiosis?
Yeah,
Exactly.
gut
For us lay
dysbiosis.
people.
Gut dysbiosis just means your stomach is not working efficiently. So you may have constant or even occasional constipation. You may have occasional loose stools or diarrhea. It doesn't have to be all the time. You may have a little heartburn, but some of the more subtle things is you have a constriction in your upper esophagus. You have a hard time swallowing. You've created a little inflammation from, you're fermenting food rather than digesting it quickly. So that creates a gas, and some will come up the esophagus and just be a light mist, and you'll see tooth erosion or just some irritation in the throat and constriction. And I
Is
see
that from stomach acid?
yeah, from a lack of stomach acid. So, what they do in the medical community is they give you a proton pump inhibitor or antacid, and that lowers the acid even further. So you're no longer fermenting, but you're absorbing even less. So you have to go through this transition between when you're refluxing, you have modest but inadequate acid, and we got to push you to very strong acid.
So
The
what's
medical
reflux?
community is going the exact wrong way.
So tell us what the reflux is.
Well, the reflux is simply digestive juices, mainly hydrochloric acid, dilute hydrochloric acid. And when you're breaking down food, if you're breaking it down slowly, it's fermentation. You create a gas. A gas expands by 1,000-fold compared to a liquid. It's got to go someplace, and so it's pushing on your stomach. That can give you intense pain or just discomfort or bloating. But then at a certain pressure, a little bit will pop up into your esophagus. And they call it heartburn because if the acid's strong enough, but not strong enough to be a good digestive medium, you feel it in this delicate esophageal tissue. Whereas the stomach lining is strong enough to hold very strong acid without any pain. It's very different tissue.
So when you have that acid reflux, does it start to damage the esophagus?
Yeah, I mean, at the late stage, it's called Barrett esophagitis, or you can even have esophageal cancer because you're really inflaming that tissue constantly. So this is not a good thing, but that's usually easily fixed by what I call fixing the stomach ecology with acid, apple cider vinegar, fermented foods, probiotics, prebiotics, bile salts, digestive enzyme. That's kind of the milieu, the terrain of your stomach. Now, a lot of people have other digestive issues that are more related to the colon, and we got to get those organisms downstream. That's why different companies have come up with Spore, but we're now looking at suppository probiotic and gut ecology constituents in a suppository. So, the gut is an open system. Here and there we have a hole, right? And so everything is going in the mouth, but going up the anus is actually a very effective way to fix. Not everybody needs this, but people that have had refractory problems with gut, with diarrhea, with constipation, with gut pain, things like that, that's really the way to go. And this is right from Dr. Sabine Hazan.
It seems like in times past, every nationality had traditional foods that we're now finding were very important foods for our health and for our health balance. Like some people, they ate a tablespoon of yogurt with every meal, or just different, and they didn't know why, but that was the way it developed. And now that we've got all this processed food and we've altered everything, we're no longer getting that, are we?
It's so true. Weston A. Price looked at 14 or plus or minus indigenous cultures, and we don't have to eat the exact same thing that the islanders were eating, or the people in the mountains of Switzerland. We need to eat whole foods, and our microbiome adapts to it. How does it do that? Like, you put out a piece of lettuce, and guess what? It's rotten in a couple of days. There's organisms there. Even if it's not fermented, you're still populating and repopulating the microbiome with the organisms that will help break it down. But like, if you look at the longest lived cultures, the Koreans is a good case study because they're seeing the greatest increase in longevity. They haven't passed the Japanese yet, but they eat the greatest variety of fermented foods. Think about refrigeration. I mean, in the 1930s, you still had the Iceman, delivering ice. So fermented food was around, very big and critical for storage of food, particularly vegetables, and then salting for meat. Just 4 generations ago. So we've been around for a heck of a lot more than 3 generations. So our gut is really adapted to, if you look at our gut, it's teeny compared to most other animals, yet our brain is large. How did that happen? Because we learned how to eat pre-digested food. Salting starts breaking the protein down. Fermenting breaks down the food. Cooking is really critical. I mean, a lot of people like the raw diet. If your gut's perfect, cook. I mean, you can eat raw, but if not, I always recommend people cook, because that's the first part of digestion that's outside of your body. And, we don't have a lot of time. You have 3.5 hours to break down everything into a liquid. And if you don't, it doesn't get absorbed.
Well, we're about out of time in this segment, but it sounds like absorption is a major portion of lack of absorption leads to many of the diseases you're talking about.
Absolutely. And I can tell you how we measure absorption.
Okay. Is it long or is it short? Because we're just about out of time in this segment.
Well, it's just the erythrocyte sedimentation rate, which is a a marker of mineral status for the most part in your environment. It's an extremely inexpensive blood test.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And is it easy to get, common to get? Is it
Oh yeah, they used to run it in the office because it can be done in a test tube on a bench in your doctor's office. They don't do it anymore, and most doctors don't even run the test or know what it really tells them. But it really is looking at one of the most important processes in your
It's
body, and
it's that
making,
time. We'll have to pick up on the important process on the other side
yeah.
of a station break. Dr. Lewis and I will be right back to continue our discussion. You stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. You have a product or service you'd like to promote to a worldwide audience? Imagine your product featured on Mission Evolution Radio TV. If you're interested in showcasing your work, Mission Evolution is broadcast to the X-Zone TV Channel 32 Simul TV, on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, YouTube, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Audible, and many other audio and social media platforms. Our professional studios can produce and broadcast your custom high-quality ad. It will be permanently embedded in each episode and featured in the archives for years to come. Together, we can make it happen. Contact us at info@missionevolution.org for more details. Spaces are limited, so don't miss out on this great opportunity. Email info@missionevolution.org today. Is cancer an infectious disease? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing chronic disease and their possible reversal is Dr. Thomas J. Lewis. His website, healthrevivalpartners.com. So there's a question for you, and I know one of your books was entitled Cancer is an Infectious Disease. So do explain that for us, will you?
Well, it's actually really easy to explain, and the researchers at Harvard understand this implicitly, but the clinicians don't have anything to do with it. I had a friend who had cancer, and I went into a consult with him, with his oncologist, and I said, "What's Jim's vitamin D level?" And the doctor said, "We measure it frequently." I said, "Well, what is it?" When I left, they drew blood because they had never measured it. It was 9. It should be 55.
Oh
This
my.
guy has cancer. So we understand that vitamin D as a hormone has a regulatory effect on our immune system. Okay, then there are a couple markers that are really profound at measuring cancer. One's called the neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio, and that's just neutrophil is a type of white blood cell. If you get a complete blood count with differential, you get that. And lymphocyte is part of the adaptive immune system. It's a type of white blood cell or a set of white blood cell surrogates. And when that ratio is high, Dana-Farber, Ohio State University, all say your prognosis for survival is really low. And neutrophils go up with bacterial infection. Lymphocytes tend to go down with viral infection. So it's really the neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio is sort of a measure for your viral, bacterial, and other infectious burden. Okay. The other marker, which is, and this test costs $2, okay, to get this, $2. And then the other ratio, biomarkers or ratio, it's ferritin, which is a protein that stores excess iron. So if you start bleeding, you don't have to produce new blood cells from the bone marrow. There's some in storage ready to be used. It's like food in the refrigerator, not in the freezer. So the ferritin iron ratio. And the traditional term for this ratio, if it goes high, is anemia of chronic disease or anemia of chronic inflammation. But inflammation is a treasure. It's our immune system. What's it fighting? So there's a very strong correlation between elevated ferritin, low iron, and infection. In fact, when I had Delta COVID, I went to the LabCorp to pull my labs, and my ferritin to iron ratio, they all said the spike is killing the red blood cells. No, your brain, your whole body, God is saying, bacteria, viruses, they need iron to replicate. So I'm going to leave the smallest amount of iron in your circulatory system that I can, and I'm going to put the rest into storage so there's no replication. So just those two $5 worth of testing proves, based on what everybody knows, Mayo Clinic, anemia of chronic inflammation, neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio, Harvard Medical School, and many, many others just show that these markers are very well tied into infection. Then you have H. pylori, Nobel Prize in Medicine 2005 for stomach ulcers, but it's now been shown colorectal cancer, gastric cancer, anal cancer, Barrett's esophagitis, very strong connection between H. pylori levels in the blood detected with antibodies and those types of cancer. Chlamydia pneumoniae, why do non-smokers get lung cancer? Mycoplasma, which is in the news now, which I've been measuring for 20 years. Chlamydia pneumoniae, not the STD, folks. You don't have to worry about getting that test and having your partner say, hey, what's up? Chlamydia pneumoniae is 99% of the chlamydial infections, but it's a lung-borne thing.
So to bring this back to the layperson, is cancer an infectious disease?
100%. But I noticed in the title, cancer is an infectious disease. I didn't say it's only an infectious disease. Anything that can create perpetual inflammation. So like asbestos is not an infection, but it's a irritant the body hasn't figured out how to remove from your body. So it's there constantly creating irritation and inflammation. So, there are many mechanisms, toxins, and other things that can elicit a tumor response. But
so is this why cancer is so hard? The cause of cancer has been so hard to find is because it's so vast.
Well, they're not looking in the right places. So, but the shame is, see, the drugs we have available, that's a business decision, and the research that's left on the shelf is vast. So the researchers tend to know all this stuff, but what you get in the pharmacy is a business decision. So it's not always the best of breed cure. I mean, look, they're Fortune 100 companies, and we're all making money if we're investing in mutual funds from these companies, and we want to see that stock go up. But they're not solving these problems. They're not that complicated. The understanding of infectious antecedents of cancer have been around for a long, long time.
So what is the health disease continuum?
So the health disease continuum is a measure of biomarkers that indicate what we got to realize is we're not either healthy or sick. Somewhere on the planet, it's the healthiest person. Somewhere on the planet is someone who is really sick and is about to die. And the rest of us lie in between. So the health disease continuum is just an idea for people that feel pretty good to realize that they're not optimal. So they're not just healthy. There's classifications of this, and we measure that very accurately because all our biomarkers are the ranges that we use for these biomarkers titrated to early all-cause mortality risk, and we know the hazard ratios for each. So we've created an algorithm that we can take our standard panel called our chronic disease temperature panel looks at 20 biomarkers.
And it's a blood test, right?
It's a blood test.
Okay.
It's a 57 marker biomarker panel, 20 of which really tell the story of chronic disease. And so what we do is we take all the values of each of those 20 biomarkers and aggregate that into a score, which we call your chronic disease temperature. And that really places people very accurately on the health disease continuum. So you can have two people like you and me, Gwilda, and we take our chronic disease temperature, and it becomes very obvious when I get that result that one of us is healthier than the other. Hopefully we're on the healthy end of the scale and we're both very close. But so it's all about precision and accuracy of testing. And
So if you are able to access these tests, does that give you kind of a heads up that you don't have huge symptoms or anything, but if you continue on the path you're on, it could go wrong in a hurry? Is that a place where we can correct it more quickly than once it's gone wrong in a hurry?
100%, because when I talk about going up this bell curve, if you're up here, it's a lot harder to bring you back down to here. But if you've been moving in the wrong direction, okay, you're moving in the wrong direction. If you're way down here, which we can measure very accurately, to get you back on track and improve your biomarkers, which is a marker for your longevity, then that's actually a very easy process. I talk about the true bell curve, and once you go over that hump, it's very, when you're on the upswing of the hump, we can get you back down. But once you go over that hump, it's often very, very difficult and takes a long, long time to reverse it. But once
Is
again,
that
I think,
is that when we have to really take some strong measures, like radical diets and that sort of thing?
yeah, when we look at mechanisms, it's not about radical diets. It's about, you know, eating well, eating things with a single ingredient on the label, taking care of your mouth and making sure your digestion is good. So if what you're taking in, you have proper calories and nutrient density and you're absorbing properly, then usually a lot of these diseases reverse. Now, sometimes we'll use, like, David Brownstein's a very famous physician, functional medical doctor up in Bloomfield, Michigan. And we call this protocol, named after him, the Brownstein protocol. So every once in a while, we'll pull out this protocol, and it's very high doses of vitamin A, C, D, and iodine. It needs to be administered under physicians or medical professionals' care because you may not be adapted to some of these things. But so sometimes just the nutrition alone or radical diets aren't sufficient enough when you're up here higher and we're trying to get you back down. So we will go into different, but not just supplementation, sort of aggressive short-term high dose supplementation. The other thing I use is immunoglobulins, which are natural generic antibodies that, with these chronic diseases that often, not always, have chronic infections underlying them, like the Epstein-Barr, like the chlamydia pneumoniae, like the oral pathogens. They hide from the immune system. So what we do is we look at how immunity is. It's hard to throw in, increase your white blood cells, artificially from the outside, but to increase immunoglobulins, antibodies, things like that, and other immune components that are natural, like vitamin A and vitamin D, which has been used to treat diseases like tuberculosis 200 years ago, are the kinds of things that I like to use first. Do we ever have to go to
Well,
pharma? Once in a while, but we try to avoid that.
we're about out of time in this segment, but I do have a question for you. There's a whole bunch of hype and about this supplement, that supplement. You hear you need vitamin this for that, and everybody starts taking that vitamin. What's your stance on that? Is that helpful? Is that useful supplementation?
So what I do is we have 5 mechanisms and we call it the hierarchy of health. What's the most important thing in terms of, like, you're building a house, you have a foundation, and the foundation is more important than the windows. So when you look at things from a systems approach, from a really mechanism of disease, then you can determine what supplements may be more beneficial for you than others. A lot of them are probably a waste of money. You're chasing down a rabbit hole that something up here can fix, that so you don't have to take this supplement and that supplement and that supplement and that supplement. You work up here from top down, and you can usually solve a lot of problems with a lot fewer supplements.
Well, it is that magic moment. We're going to take another station break. Please stay with us as Dr. Lewis and I continue to explore what we may be missing in our approaches to healthcare. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Are we looking for health in all the wrong places? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Dr. Thomas J. Lewis, his website, healthrevivalpartners.com. Dr. Lewis, it, from the last 3 segments that we've been talking, it looks like our normal approach to healthcare, even those of us that kind of study for ourselves and try to figure out what's going on and take supplements and try to eat right, it's much more complex than that. Where do we know to start? Where do we need to look for help?
I actually think it's simpler than we make it out to be. I mean, the industrial complex has their 68,000 diagnostic codes. Functional medicine does every single test under the sun. So there has to be some in between ground. And so I just say start at the beginning. What are you putting into your mouth? What air are you breathing? What water are you drinking? We have a microbiome, right? And most water is chlorinated to kill what? Organisms. So that's a good first step. Fluoride is a neurotoxin, and so many people are still using fluoride in their kids. It's a shame. We've lost a lot of IQ points. So that's a good thing. I think getting moms, if you get off to a good start, getting moms and dad not listening to their, pediatrician, taking the fish oil, taking the iodine, high fat diet that help build brain. We have huge brains. That's not made from carbohydrates. That's made from fat. So these are some of the basic things. But let me just give you a biomarker I alluded to earlier that can really help people that think they're healthy understand that maybe they aren't so healthy. Because at the end of the day, the food we take in is no different than the gasoline we put in our car and the coolant and other things to keep the car sustained, not just beyond the engine putting out power, but those carbs produce electrons. That's what creates the fire in your gas engine. And we have a more controlled process within our mitochondria. And if that is not working well, you are not producing electrons, and we're an electric body, okay? Every cell in your body, neuron, bone, red blood cell, is a mini battery. And the red blood cells are particularly easy to measure because they go through capillaries, single file, and they're playing bumper cars, but they never touch in a healthy blood because they have a charge on that creates a repulsion. And that is measured with the erythrocyte sedimentation rate. So this is the measure of how fast red blood cells settle. And they shouldn't settle at all because they're repelling each other. If they do, they're sticking. Do you want an 18-wheeler running through your capillaries, or you want a Ferrari? And so that is the reason why the erythrocyte sedimentation rate, a $2 test, is so important, is because it's measuring the complete end game of everything you're doing to be healthy. What is the electrical potential that you're producing? What is the sort of the electricity in your body? And that number should be 2 millimeters per hour or less. The standard of care says up to 40 is okay, 40 millimeters of sedimentation. When you have 40 millimeters of sedimentation, you have, you're on a highway and there's not a single car on it. It's just 18 wheelers. And that's what you don't want. So, and so two things really drive that. One, malabsorption. Well, 2.5, I'll use my Boston accent. Insufficient nutrient density in our foods. And, most foods that we get in the regular grocery stores are grown on soils that are very depleted. So I always recommend people take a liquid fulvic humic with their daily, an ounce or two of this, which has all the micronutrients that was in our old decaying vegetables that they've extracted. But the other thing are these chronic infections, which, how do they live? They live on electrons. So they are electron stealers. So you're producing electrons in your cells, but these organisms are stealing them. And, I see this all the time, that the number one real complaint is gut dysbiosis, but a lot of people ignore the symptoms. You shouldn't. But the number two is chronic fatigue. And chronic fatigue is either, you're not repairing well and your body's struggling to rebuild tissue. But the other thing is these organisms are at the buffet table inside your cells, the mitochondria, and they're stealing electrons out of what's called the electron transport chain to make your energy ATP. So like they're taking what would otherwise lead to the generation of your energy ATP before it can get there and make it. So, that's how I make it simplified. You run a white blood cell count, you run a SED rate, you run a C-reactive protein to see your inflammatory status. So that's not very complicated. That's just some basic biomarkers. And then what's going on with your mouth? What's going on with your gut? What are you taking in for nutrition? Are you absorbing it well? You can get more advanced with functional tests like micronutrient status and things of that nature. But for the most part, if I see the SED rate, one marker, if I see that SED rate up, we know what to do. We know what to do, and it's not a treasure trove of interventions, if you will. It's some very basic things: probiotics, prebiotics, digestive support, making sure the immune system is healthy. Those are the two biggest factors.
Well, it's that time in the show when I get to ask you, what's your mission?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. So I run a direct-to-consumer program, and I run a corporate program where I work, install wellness programs at self-funded companies. But my real mission, which will take the rest of my life, and fortunately I have a son who's following in my footsteps somewhat, is to install not a parallel health system, but we need to have a system that doesn't just test for acute problems, but also test for chronic problems. So we have two types of disease, acute and chronic. We need to have two different scales for measuring where you are. Obviously, we need to have an acute scale because that's an emergency situation. But chronic is driving most of everything else, and that's 90%. So we absolutely need to install a scale. And so what I'm really working on, I've been working on it, I think we're pretty much there, but now it's getting people into our population programs, is to have a truly evidence-driven health program that looks at things from a very systematic approach, so we're not going down multiple rabbit holes. So I'm talking about a low-cost, very efficient, scalable population type program, the cornerstone of which are robust risk assessments and labs interpreted from a chronic smoldering perspective that even the apparently well oftentimes will be surprised when they see their biomarkers are well out of whack.
So you have mentioned numerous times something I think is overlooked a lot, and that's the mouth. Okay.
Mhm.
We use fluoride. We use mouthwash with things that kill germs. How is all that affecting us? What do we need to watch
Oh
out
my
for our
goodness,
mouth?
fluoride. That's a very aggressive chemical. So it's the strongest chemical on the periodic table. So it can get in and cause harm. It's natural, and at low concentrations, the dose makes the poison. But Nathan Bryan, who's a guru on nitric oxide, has shown that in athletes that he did testing with traditional mouthwashes, that their blood pressure goes up in a bad way. So we're killing the microbiome. So we have to be very careful about that. Now, if someone has bleeding gums, receding gums, root canals, then we might get more aggressive, something like a chlorine dioxide solution, which creates a gas that penetrates more deeply. But some of the more natural things, like I'll tell you something that I do that a lot of people that are on a low budget follow me on, is I use a lye soap as a toothpaste
Ugh.
because no, with no flavorants. It's actually not bad. See, the lye creates alkalinity in the mouth, which inhibits bacteria, and the soap itself sucks up biofilm, which a lot of these organisms, like the slime at the coastline, you have the same thing going on in your mouth. But never get a root canal, and if you have one, I'm sorry, you paid a lot of money for that. But the biggest thing I can suggest for you, if you're over the age of 60 and it's been in there a while, that has to go, because it'll be an ongoing source of low-grade inflammation and infection. And as you age, your immune system, immunosenescence, comes down. So these pathogens are going to go up. And the number one thing that oral pathogens cause is vascular disease. What's the number one killer? Vascular disease. A dear friend of mine published a paper, and she proved it for the last 30 years, called Alzheimer's, a Spiroketosis. And spirochetes are like Lyme disease, but spirochetes are also in the mouth. So the number one cause of Lyme syndrome, Lyme brain, joint pain, shrink as we age. The organisms get in and chew up the discs, which are nice. Like I call them the Twinkie equivalent of a bone. And so they can get everywhere and cause all kinds of havoc. So obviously, I've talked a lot about these infections, but if you keep your immune system healthy, we were designed to be in balance with these things. They're here for a purpose. When we die, just like that piece of lettuce that starts rotting, that's what we're supposed to do. They're already there. Okay. But as long as we keep the immune system above these guys, we're all set. But see, in our modern world with the glyphosate, the toxins, the endocrine disruptors, the low quality food, the eating too many carbs, the low fiber levels, antacids and other drugs that affect our gut microbiome, we're really put in a compromised position.
Well,
And
I'm unfortunately we're out of time. But thank you so much for coming on the show and opening our eyes to new ways of looking at sickness and disease.
been my pleasure, Gwilda. Thank you so much for having me.
Our guest this hour has been Dr. Thomas J. Lewis. Dr. Lewis is a leading authority on the mechanisms of chronic disease and the author of numerous books, including Cancer is an Infectious Disease. To find out more about Dr. Lewis, where you can find his books and all he has to offer, visit his website, healthrevivalpartners.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy our past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. But please be sure to join me right here next time as this mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support to an evolving world.